I'm telling you, Cherry, we're home free. Yeah, Stratton hasn't got a clue what's going on.
Remember life before smartphones? No endless scrolling, no instant notifications, just pure uninterrupted time. But what did people actually do back then? Believe it or not, boredom wasn't the crisis we think it is today. People found all kinds of ways to entertain themselves, connect with others, and get this, actually be present in the moment. Before screens took over, social interactions happened face-to-face, whether that was chatting with neighbors, gathering around board games, or passing notes in class like it was some secret spy mission. Books weren't just for school. They were a legit escape. And if you were out and about, you had to actually remember directions or ask a stranger for help. In this video, we're diving into the surprisingly creative, sometimes weird, and maybe even better ways people spent their time before smartphones. And who knows, you might just get inspired to try a few yourself. Reading. All right, picture this. You're waiting at the doctor's office, sitting in a coffee shop alone, or stuck on a long train ride. Today, you'd probably be scrolling through TikTok, checking Instagram, or binging some random YouTube shorts. But before smartphones, people actually read. Yeah, like willingly. Books, magazines, newspapers, these were the OG time killers. If you had a long commute, you weren't playing Candy Crush. You had a paperback stuffed in your bag. People would get lost in novels, devour mystery thrillers, or flip through glossy magazines, absorbing everything from celebrity gossip to weird did-you-know facts. Even newspapers, yes, those giant crinkly things, were a daily ritual. And let's not forget the bathroom reading material. Before smartphones made it a TikTok watching zone, people had books in there. Think Reader's Digest, Garfield comics, or even the back of a shampoo bottle. Reading wasn't just entertainment. It was how people learned stuff. Want to know what's happening in the world? Read a newspaper. Want to pick up a new skill? Grab a book. Even waiting in line at the DMV wasn't a total time suck if you had a good novel. But now, most people don't carry a book everywhere. They've got a phone. Reading still exists, sure, but it's competing with an endless stream of memes, notifications, and viral videos. Makes you wonder, did we trade deep focus for doom scrolling? Watching TV and movies. In the early 2000s, before smartphones, there was no social media feed to scroll endlessly on, no TikTok rabbit holes. It makes you wonder, how did people really pass the time? Well, one of the biggest ways was watching TV and movies, and I mean really watching them. Not half paying attention while scrolling Instagram. Not skipping to the good parts. People actually sat down, turned off the lights, and got immersed in whatever was on screen. TV wasn't background noise. It was a ritual. You had to check the TV guide or just hope your favorite show was on. And if you missed it, tough luck. No rewind, no instant replay. You just had to wait for a rerun. And movies? Going to the theater was an event. You planned it. You got snacks. You didn't just casually throw on a movie while doing chores. Even watching at home was an experience. Renting a VHS or DVD, gathering around the TV, and actually paying attention, because pausing wasn't always an option. Today, we consume content in bite-sized chunks, but back then, TV and movies were the main event. No second screens, no distractions, just pure undivided attention. Crazy to think about, right? Listening to the radio. Before the era of endless scrolling and social media algorithms that made it impossible to stop staring at your screens, people passed the time with something a little more analog, the radio. Yeah, that thing in your car that you probably only use when your Bluetooth isn't working. Back in the day, it was the way to stay entertained. Before smartphones turned us all into screen zombies, the radio is how people got their music, news, and even their daily dose of drama. Whether it was top 40 hits, classic rock, or a late-night talk show, the radio was always on. You didn't get to choose what played next. You just tuned in and hoped for the best. And if your favorite song came on, you prayed you had a blank cassette ready to record it. But it wasn't just about music. Sports games, mystery shows, comedy hours, radio had something for everyone. Families would sit around together listening to their favorite broadcasts like it was an event. Road trips, no aux cord, just flipping through stations until you found one that wasn't static. And let's not forget about the legendary radio DJs. These guys were the influencers of their time, hyping up new songs, running contests, and even giving love advice. Sure, we've got podcasts and Spotify now, but there was something magical about the unpredictability of radio. It wasn't just entertainment, it was an experience. Writing letters. Back in the day, if you wanted to talk to a friend, spill some drama, or confess your love, you didn't just fire off a text, you wrote it all out, by hand. And it wasn't just about communication, it was also an experience. People took their time choosing the right words, crafting their messages carefully, and sometimes even adding little doodles or pressed flowers. It was slow, personal, and way more meaningful than a D text. And get this, waiting for a letter to arrive was a whole process. Imagine checking your mailbox every day, hoping for a response. No read receipts, no instant replies, just pure anticipation. And when you finally got that letter, pure joy. Some letters were pages long, filled with emotions, stories, and updates from friends and family across the world. Writing letters wasn't just a way to communicate, it was a hobby, a ritual, and a creative outlet. People even had fancy stationery and wax seals to make their letters extra special. Sure, we've got DMs and emails now, but nothing quite compares to the charm of a handwritten letter. So, what do you think? Maybe it's time to bring it back. Playing board games. Picture this. It's a Friday night and the TV only has a handful of channels, and there's no TikTok, no Instagram, no doom scrolling. So what do people do? They break out the board games. Yeah, before smartphones turned us into screen zombies. Board games were the go-to way to kill time, bond with family, and let's be honest, start a few sibling rivalries. We're talking about classics like Monopoly, where family feuds started over stolen properties. Scrabble? That's where you found out who secretly memorized the dictionary. And Clue? The OG murder mystery game before true crime podcasts were a thing. Board games weren't just about passing the time, they were a full-on experience. You had the strategy games, the luck-based ones, and of course, the ones that made you question your friendships. Families would gather around the table, dice in hand, and suddenly it wasn't just a game, it was war. But here's the thing, board games weren't just fun, they were social. Unlike scrolling on your phone in silence, they actually forced people to talk, laugh, argue, and yeah, occasionally flip the board in frustration. And sure, we've got video games now, but there's something about rolling dice, moving pieces, and that sweet victory dance when you absolutely destroy your opponents. So next time you're bored, maybe put down the phone and go old school. Just maybe don't play Monopoly. Trust me, it never ends well. Playing card games. Back in the day before smartphones ruled our every waking moment, people had a different way of passing the time, playing card games. Yeah, before Candy Crush and doom scrolling, a deck of cards was the ultimate entertainment device. You could pull it out anytime, anywhere, and instantly turn boredom into fun. Whether it was a quick game of solitaire alone, a heated round of poker with friends, or an intense rummy battle with family, cards were the original time killer. Think about it. Airports, long train rides, waiting rooms, even school lunch breaks. Instead of zoning out into a screen, people actually interacted. Card games weren't just about winning. They were about strategy, social bonding, and let's be real, a little friendly trash talk. They even had secret codes like tapping the table in blackjack or bluffing in poker. And let's not forget how accessible they were. No batteries, no updates, just 52 pieces of pure analog entertainment. Some decks were fancy, some were worn out, but every crease and bent corner told a story. Sure, we've got infinite entertainment in our pockets now, but maybe, just maybe, we lost something along the way. So next time you're tempted to reach for your phone, why not shuffle up a deck instead? You might be surprised at how much fun playing cards the old school way can be. Puzzles and brain teasers. So you're stuck in a waiting room with no Wi-Fi, no phone, nothing. What do you do? If this were, say, 30 years ago, you'd probably be flipping through a crossword puzzle, fiddling with a Rubik's Cube, or challenging yourself with a Sudoku grid. Yeah, before TikTok and endless scrolling puzzles and brain teasers were the way to pass the time. Think about it. Humans have always been obsessed with solving things. From ancient riddles carved into stone tablets to medieval chess matches, we've used brain games as a way to entertain ourselves and stay sharp. Fast forward to the 20th century, and puzzles exploded. Crosswords? A newspaper staple. Jigsaw puzzles? A whole family activity. And then came the brain teaser books, the kind you'd find on a coffee table or in the backseat of a car, right next to a half-finished word search. And let's not forget the ultimate offline flex, the Rubik's Cube. If you could solve one of those bad boys in under 2 minutes, you were basically a wizard. But here's the thing, puzzles weren't just about passing time. They were a way to exercise our brains, spark creativity, and even bring people together. Sure, today we've got brain training apps, but there's something nostalgic, maybe even a little magical about the way we used to engage our minds without a screen. So, next time you're bored, maybe put the phone down, grab a crossword. Who knows, you might just enjoy the challenge. Crafting and hobbies. Before smartphones took over our free time, people had to get creative, literally. Instead of doom scrolling, they spent hours on hands-on hobbies like knitting, woodworking, painting, and even building model trains. These activities weren't just ways to pass the time, they were sources of pride, relaxation, and even social connection. Think about it. Back in the day, instead of binge-watching shows, people were scrapbooking their favorite memories, sewing their own clothes, or learning an instrument. These weren't just hobbies, they were skills that took time and patience to master. And let's be real, crocheting an entire sweater takes way more dedication than scrolling TikTok for 3 hours straight. But hobbies weren't just solo activities. Before group chats, people actually met up in real life for book clubs, knitting circles, and woodworking workshops. Instead of texting, they were swapping crafting tips over a cup of coffee. And let's not forget board games and puzzles. Families and friends would gather around the table for a competitive night of chess, Monopoly, which probably led to a few arguments, or a massive jigsaw puzzle that took weeks to finish. The best part? These hobbies had tangible results. Unlike an endless social media feed, at the end of the day, you actually had something to show for your time, whether it was a finished painting, a handmade scarf, or a well-played guitar tune. So next time you're bored, maybe put down the phone and pick up a hobby. Who knows? You might just surprise yourself. Listening to music. Before we had infinite content at our fingertips, music was the go-to way to kill time. Whether it was burning CDs, making mixtapes, or flipping through a massive CD binder in the car, music wasn't just background noise. It was everything. You actually had to choose what you were listening to. And sometimes that meant rewinding a cassette with a pencil or waiting for your favorite song to come on the radio just so you could record it. Back then, music wasn't just something you played in the background, it was the main event. And honestly, kind of miss that. Scrapbooking and journaling. All right, picture this. It's the early 2000s. No smartphones, no endless social media scrolling. Just you, a stack of printed photos, some colorful paper, and maybe even a few stickers. Welcome to the world of scrapbooking and journaling. The OG way people documented their lives before Instagram stories and TikTok vlogs. Before we had phones glued to our hands, people spent hours carefully arranging memories into scrapbooks. Every event, birthdays, vacations, even random hangouts, deserved its own decorated page. And if you were really into it, you had themed paper, fancy gel pens, and those iconic decorative scissors that cut in zigzags. Scrapbooking wasn't just about pasting photos, it was storytelling, a tangible way to relive moments over and over. And then there was journaling, the more personal, introspective sibling of scrapbooking. Think of it as the original Notes app. But instead of ranting in private, people poured their thoughts into leather-bound diaries or those marble composition notebooks. Whether it was recounting a crush, venting about school, or just scribbling doodles in the margins, journaling was a form of self-expression long before tweeting your thoughts into the void. Now, sure, smartphones have made capturing memories effortless, but there's something special about physically crafting a scrapbook or filling up a journal. It's nostalgic, it's creative, and let's be honest, looking back on your old handwriting hits way harder than scrolling through your camera roll. Maybe it's time we bring it back? Let us know in the comments what you think. Cooking and baking. Before the era of smartphones, people engaged in various activities to pass the time. And one of the most common and rewarding pastimes was cooking and baking. Whether out of necessity or for leisure, preparing food was a daily ritual that brought families together, fostered creativity, and provided a sense of accomplishment. Cooking and baking were more than just chores, they were social activities. Families spent time in the kitchen, sharing recipes passed down through generations, experimenting with flavors, and teaching younger members essential skills. Grandparents taught grandchildren how to knead dough for bread. Mothers and fathers showed their children how to season food properly. And friends gathered to bake treats for special occasions. Beyond the social aspect, cooking and baking served as creative outlets. People took pride in trying new recipes, decorating cakes, or making intricate dishes from scratch. Without the constant distractions of screens, they had the patience to slow down and enjoy the process, savoring the sights, smells, and textures of their culinary creations. Additionally, food preparation provided comfort and relaxation. The rhythmic motion of chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, or kneading dough was almost meditative. Baking, in particular, had a soothing quality. Watching ingredients transform into something delicious was deeply satisfying. Before smartphones dominated entertainment, cooking and baking filled time with purpose. They were ways to bond, express creativity, and enjoy simple pleasures, practices that still hold value in today's fast-paced digital world. Today, we scroll through TikTok to pass the time, but back then they made sourdough before it was a quarantine trend. So next time you're bored, maybe put the phone down and pick up a whisk. You might just find out why the kitchen was the original entertainment hub. Household chores and DIY projects. Before the rise of smartphones, people spent much of their free time engaging in household chores and DIY projects. These activities were not just necessities, but also served as productive ways to stay busy, improve their living spaces, and foster creativity. Believe it or not, household chores and DIY projects weren't just obligations, they were ways to pass the time, stay productive, and even have fun. Think about it. Without the distraction of a screen in your pocket, you had the patience to deep clean the kitchen, reorganize the garage, or finally fix that leaky faucet. People spent hours maintaining their homes, not because they had to, but because, well, what else was there to do? But it wasn't all about chores. DIY was a big deal. Before YouTube tutorials, people figured things out through good old-fashioned trial and error. Whether it was building furniture, sewing clothes, or even making homemade soap, these projects weren't just practical. They were entertainment. It was creativity, problem-solving, and a sense of accomplishment, all rolled into one. And let's not forget, this was also social time. Families usually did these tasks together, neighbors helped each other, and skills were passed down through generations. So next time you feel restless, maybe put down the phone and pick up a hammer, or at least fold the laundry. Learning new skills. Before smartphones became a constant presence in daily life, people found creative and productive ways to pass the time. One of the most common and valuable activities was learning new skills. Without instant access to social media, streaming services, and mobile games, people often turned to hands-on hobbies, intellectual pursuits, and skill-building activities to occupy their free time. Many individuals spent their leisure hours mastering musical instruments, practicing painting or sketching, or engaging in handicrafts like knitting, woodworking, or pottery. These activities not only provided entertainment, but also fostered creativity and personal growth. Additionally, people invested time in learning new languages, studying historical or philosophical texts, and honing skills such as calligraphy, chess, or even shorthand writing. Outdoor and physical activities also played a significant role in skill development. People frequently took up hobbies like gardening, fishing, cooking, or sports to stay engaged. These skills were often passed down through generations, strengthening family and community bonds. Group activities such as dancing, playing board games, and participating in book clubs encouraged social interaction while also providing intellectual stimulation. Unlike today's digital distractions, these pursuits required patience, discipline, and dedication. Learning a new skill was seen as a meaningful way to spend time, offering long-term rewards rather than instant gratification. While technology has brought convenience, it has also shifted how people use their free time. However, revisiting the habit of skill building can be a fulfilling way to disconnect from screens and reconnect with creativity, discipline, and human interaction. Fast forward to today, and yeah, our phones are amazing. But maybe, just maybe, we lost a little of that magic. So next time you catch yourself doom scrolling, maybe try picking up a guitar or learning to juggle. Who knows? You might just bring back a piece of that lost era. Talking on landline phones. Before smartphones revolutionized communication, landline phones played a central role in social interactions and passing the time, whether it was long, late-night conversations with friends, catching up with family, or even prank calling for fun. For many, talking on the phone was a form of entertainment. Teens would spend hours on the phone discussing school, relationships, and pop culture. Since households typically had only one or two landlines, phone conversations often took place in common areas, leading to humorous or awkward moments when family members eavesdropped or interrupted. Some homes had cordless phones, allowing for more privacy, but others required stretching the cord into another room for some secrecy. Landlines also played a role in dating culture. Before texting and social media, people relied on phone calls to get to know someone. Calling a crush or waiting anxiously for a callback was a common experience. Friends would even have three-way calls to chat in groups before group messaging existed. Beyond casual conversations, landlines were essential for staying informed. People used them to call hotlines for weather updates, movie showtimes, or even dial in radio stations to request songs. Many also passed the time by chatting with distant relatives, strengthening family bonds. Though smartphones have largely replaced landlines, those who grew up using them remember the excitement of picking up the receiver and hearing a familiar voice on the other end. It was a simple but meaningful way to connect and spend time before the digital age took over. Going to the mall. All right, picture this. It's the early 2000s. There's no TikTok, no Instagram, no endless scrolling to fill the awkward gaps in your day. So what did people do to pass the time? They went to the mall. Malls weren't just for shopping, they were a full-blown social hub. You and your friends would get dropped off by your parents, or if you were cool enough, you had a friend with a car. You had nowhere specific to go, but that was kind of the point. Maybe you'd grab a pretzel, browse Hot Topic for a band tea you couldn't afford, or just people watch from the food court. If you were a teenager, the mall was the place to be seen. You'd awkwardly walk past your crush's favorite store multiple times hoping they'd notice you. Groups of kids would just loiter outside the movie theater, even if they had no intention of actually watching a movie. And let's talk about window shopping. Before online wish lists, you had to physically go to a store, try on ridiculous outfits, and imagine a future where you could actually buy them. It was a whole experience. But then, smartphones happened. Socializing moved online. Malls started emptying out. And while they still exist, they don't quite hold the same magic they once did. So yeah, before people killed time by doom scrolling, they killed time by wandering aimlessly through a giant building filled with stores they barely shopped at. And honestly, that sounds kind of nice. Attending community events. Before the endless scroll, before binge watching, before notifications controlled our lives, how did people pass the time? Well, believe it or not, the answer was community events. Yep, back in the day, if you wanted entertainment, you had to go outside. Wild concept, right? Towns and neighborhoods thrived on gatherings. Fairs, dances, parades, church socials, sports games, and community meetings. These weren't just casual outings. They were the main event. Imagine a Friday night. No doom scrolling on TikTok, no group chats blowing up. Instead, you're dressing up for a town dance or heading to a local game. This was how people socialized, met new friends, and get this, actually talked to each other without a screen in sight. These events kept people connected. You didn't just hear about what was happening. You showed up. Missed the county fair? Tough luck, no live stream. If you wanted to be in the loop, you had to be there. So next time you're bored, maybe try going old school. Find a local event, show up, and see what happens. You just might be surprised. Playing group sports. All right, picture this. It's the early 2000s, or maybe even the 90s. No smartphones, no endless scrolling, no viral dance trends. So what did people do to kill time? Simple. Group sports. Yeah, that thing where people actually left their houses, ran around, and, interacted in real life. Back in the day, before we had instant access to entertainment in our pockets, sports were the go-to activity. You'd gather a bunch of friends, maybe knock on doors, or call their landlines, yep, actual phones with cords, and head to the park. Soccer, basketball, baseball, even a game of good old-fashioned tag, it didn't matter. The point was just to be outside doing something. And it wasn't just for fun, it was social currency. If you were good at basketball, you were the guy everyone picked first. If you were fast, you ruled at capture the flag. These games built friendships, rivalries, and memories, no screenshots needed. Fast forward to today, and it's a different world. Entertainment is digital. Socializing happens through screens. But there was something special about those days of just showing up at a park. No texts needed and no distractions. Just pure, uninterrupted fun. Maybe it's time we put the phones down and bring that back. What do you think? Dancing and social gatherings. All right, imagine this. You're living in a time before TikTok, Instagram, and endless scrolling. No notifications, no group chats blowing up at 2 a.m. How did people actually pass the time? Believe it or not, they hung out like in person. And one of the biggest ways people connected? Dancing and social gatherings. Before the digital age hijacked our attention, people didn't just sit around binge watching content. They were the entertainment. Whether it was a lively dance hall, a jazz club, or just a backyard party with a record player, people found joy in moving to the music. Dancing wasn't just about busting a move. It was a form of social glue. It was where people met, flirted, showed off, and probably embarrassed themselves a little too. Take the 1950s, for example. Rock and roll had teenagers like twisting and shaking at sock hops. The 70s? Disco fever took over nightclubs, and people dressed like they were starring in their own Saturday Night Fever montage. Even further back, in the roaring 20s, Jazz clubs were the place to be, packed with flappers and smooth-talking guys who knew how to swing dance. But it wasn't just about dancing. Social gatherings, from parlor games in the 1800s to bonfires and community picnics, were how people bonded. The energy, the laughter, the face-to-face interactions, something you just can't replicate with a screen. So next time you find yourself endlessly scrolling, maybe consider this. What if the best moments happen off the screen? Reading newspapers and magazines. Another thing people did before the emergence of smartphones to kill time was, wait for it, newspapers and magazines. Yeah, those stacks of printed paper you probably only see at a doctor's office now. Imagine this. You wake up in the morning, no phone in sight. What do? You grab the daily newspaper, flip through the pages, and scan the headlines over a cup of coffee. Sports scores, breaking news, stock market updates, it was all there. And if you missed something, too bad. No instant refresh, no push notifications. You had to wait until tomorrow's edition. Magazines? Oh, they were the premium glossy version of the newspaper. Whether you were into fashion, music, politics, or celebrity gossip, there was a magazine for you. People collected them, shared them, even displayed them on coffee tables like trophies. But here's the thing. Reading newspapers and magazines wasn't just about getting information. It was an experience. The smell of fresh ink, the sound of pages turning, even clipping out articles to save for later. These were small rituals people actually looked forward to. So next time you're mindlessly scrolling, remember, before smartphones, people actually sat down and read. Crazy, right? Listening to portable music players. Ah, the good old days before we had infinite scrolling, doom scrolling, and an app for literally everything. Back in the early 2000s, if you were bored on the bus, waiting for a friend, or just zoning out in your room, you weren't staring at a screen, you were lost in your music. And the weapon of choice? A portable music player. Let's take a little trip down memory lane. First, there was the Walkman Sony's cassette-playing masterpiece. You had to carry extra tapes, swap them out, and pray your batteries didn't die mid-song. But hey, it made you appreciate an album from start to finish. Then came the Discman. CDs gave us better sound, but good luck jogging with one of those, unless you liked your music skipping every few steps. Then everything changed with MP3 players and of course the iPod. Suddenly you could fit thousands of songs in your pocket. You weren't just listening to music, you were curating your own soundtrack for life. And let's not forget the countless hours spent organizing songs on iTunes or hunting for the perfect LimeWire download, hopefully virus-free. Portable music players weren't just entertainment, they were escapes. They made boring moments cinematic. Walking to school, you were in a music video. Long bus ride, time to get existential with some Coldplay. Before smartphones took over, music was how we filled the silence. And honestly, it was kind of magical. Writing in a notebook. Picture this. It's the early 2000s. No smartphones, no TikTok, no infinite scrolling. You're waiting for a friend at a coffee shop, and there's no dopamine hit device in your pocket. What do? You pull out a notebook. Yeah, before smartphones hijacked our attention, people used to pass the time by actually writing things down. Crazy, right? Whether it was journaling, doodling, writing poetry, or just jotting down random thoughts. Notebooks were the ultimate way to kill time, and they didn't even need a charger. People used them like personal diaries, sketchbooks, or even to-do lists that didn't buzz with annoying notifications. Writers scribbled down ideas for books, musicians drafted lyrics, and everyday people recorded their thoughts without the fear of a typos turning into an embarrassing autocorrect fail. But here's the thing, writing in a notebook wasn't just a way to pass time, it was an experience. The feel of the paper, the scratch of the pen, the freedom to create something without distractions. No likes, no comments, just your thoughts, raw and unfiltered. Sure, smartphones are convenient, but they'll never replace the personal connection of a handwritten note. Maybe that's why bullet journaling and aesthetic planners are making a comeback. Because deep down, we miss the simplicity of just writing things down. So next time you're stuck waiting somewhere, try it. Put down your phone, pick up a notebook. You might be surprised what your own mind comes up with. Daydreaming. So let's say you're stuck in traffic, no phone, no music, just your thoughts. What do? Well, before the era of infinite scrolling and endless notifications, people had a much simpler way to kill time. Daydreaming. Yeah, that thing your teacher used to yell at you for. Turns out, it was the OG entertainment system. Back in the day, whether you were riding the bus, waiting in line, or just lying in bed, your mind was the ultimate escape room. People would drift into imaginary scenarios, maybe replaying an argument but actually winning this time. or picturing themselves as the main character in some epic adventure. It wasn't just about passing the time. Daydreaming was a creativity factory. Writers, inventors, and artists often credit their best ideas to random daydreams. Albert Einstein, huge daydreamer. Dude literally came up with the theory of relativity while imagining riding a beam of light. Fast forward to today, and our brains don't get that same downtime. Instead of letting our minds wander, we fill every spare second with TikToks, texts, or checking emails for the 47th time. But maybe, just maybe, we lost something along the way. What if the key to creativity, problem solving, and even happiness isn't in our phones, but in letting ourselves get a little bored? So next time you reach for your phone out of habit, try just staring out the window instead. Who knows? You might just invent the next theory of relativity. Starting conversations. Let's picture this. You're waiting in line at a coffee shop, no phone in sight. What do? If this were 20, maybe even 15 years ago, the answer was simple. You'd talk to people. Yeah, wild concept, right? But back in the pre-smartphone era, making small talk wasn't just something people did, it was practically a social survival skill. Think about it. Long bus rides, waiting rooms, sitting at a diner counter, all prime opportunities for casual conversations. People chatted about the weather, local news, or that one neighbor who never returned their lawnmower. These weren't deep, life-changing discussions, but they filled the silence, built connections, and sometimes even led to unexpected friendships. Bars and cafes, total hubs for interaction. Strangers bonding over a shared love for coffee, debating which band was actually the best, or just swapping life stories, because hey, why not? Even grocery store lines had their moments. Someone would comment on your snack choices, and boom, you're suddenly discussing the best brand of potato chips. Now, obviously, smartphones didn't kill conversation, but let's be real. We don't talk to strangers as much anymore. Today, when we're bored, we scroll. But before touchscreens took over, filling time meant filling the air with words. Maybe it's time we brought that back. Next time you're stuck waiting somewhere, try putting the phone away and saying, "Hey, how's your day going?" You never know where the convo might lead. Going for walks and hikes. Before the rise of smartphones and digital entertainment, people relied on simpler, more physically engaging activities to pass the time. One of the most common and enjoyable pastimes was going for walks and hikes. Whether strolling through a neighborhood, taking a scenic walk in a park, or venturing into the wilderness, walking and hiking served as a way for people to connect with nature, socialize, and reflect. Walks were an essential part of daily life. Families would take evening walks after dinner. Couples would enjoy leisurely strolls, and friends would meet up for long walks as a way to talk and bond. It wasn't just about exercise, it was a social and recreational activity that allowed people to appreciate their surroundings and engage in meaningful conversations without the distractions of technology. Hiking, on the other hand, provided a deeper escape. Without instant access to digital maps or social media, hikers relied on guidebooks, paper maps, and their sense of direction to explore trails. The experience was immersive, offering an opportunity to disconnect from daily routines and appreciate the quiet beauty of forests, mountains, and rivers. Many people saw hiking as a form of adventure, self-discovery, and even meditation. In a time before smartphones consumed so much of people's attention, walking and hiking were valuable ways to pass the time. They offered physical benefits, mental clarity, and social connection, something that, even today, remains important in an increasingly digital world. Riding bicycles. Back in the day, riding a bike wasn't just transportation, it was entertainment. It was how you killed time, how you explored, and how you hung out with friends. No group chats, no problem. You just hop on your bike, ride around the neighborhood, and somehow, without GPS or texting, everyone would just find each other at the park. Magic. And let's talk about the adventure factor. Before Google Maps ruined the mystery of the world, kids would just pick a random direction and go. Maybe you'd find a shortcut through some sketchy woods, or an abandoned lot that became your new hideout. Every ride had the potential to become a full-blown adventure. Even solo rides were a vibe. No Spotify playlists, just the sound of your tires on the pavement and the wind in your face. If you were lucky, you had a Walkman or CD player strapped to your waistband, skipping every time you hit a bump. Fast forward to today, and sure, biking is still a thing, but it's different. Now people track their rides with fitness apps and post their mileage online. Back then, you just rode because it was fun. So yeah, before smartphones took over our attention, bicycles were the ultimate escape. No notifications, no distractions, just you, two wheels, and the open road. Fishing and hunting. Before the era of smartphones, people actually went outside, and two of the biggest pastimes back then, fishing and hunting. For thousands of years, these weren't just hobbies, they were a way of life. People hunted and fished to eat, but as time went on, they became more than just survival tactics. They turned into sports, traditions, and even social events. Think of it like the original hanging out with the boys. Instead of sending memes in a group chat, you'd swap stories around a fire after a long day of tracking deer or reeling in fish. There was skill involved too. You had to know where the fish were biting, how to set a trap, and when to move quietly so you wouldn't scare off prey. No Google, no YouTube tutorials, just wisdom passed down from parents, grandparents, or that one old guy in town who knew way too much about duck calls. And let's be real, this was peak patience training. Unlike refreshing an app for instant dopamine, you had to sit in a tree stand for hours or wait by a lake, hoping for the perfect catch. It wasn't about quick rewards, it was about the experience, the challenge, and the story you got to tell afterward. So yeah, before the age of notifications and never-ending scrolling, people were out in the wild, testing their skills, embracing nature, and making memories the old school way. And honestly, that doesn't sound half bad. Camping and picnicking. Yep, we're talking camping and picnicking. Two classic pastimes that were all the old rage before smartphones turned us into screen zombies. Picture this. No notifications, no Wi-Fi, just fresh air, good company, and maybe a few too many mosquito bites. Back in the day, families and friends would load up their cars with picnic baskets, sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, and if they were fancy, a cooler full of soda. The goal? Find the perfect shady spot, lay down a blanket, and enjoy food while actually talking to each other. Crazy concept, right? And then there was camping, the OG weekend escape. Instead of checking Instagram, people built campfires, swapped ghost stories, and cooked marshmallows without posting them on their stories. Kids explored the woods, hiked trails, and played with sticks. Yes, sticks. People actually sat under the stars, looking up, instead of down at a screen. Of course, things weren't perfect. Forget your matches, and you were rubbing two sticks together like a caveman. And let's not even talk about setting up a tent without YouTube tutorials. But here's the thing, camping and picnicking weren't just ways to kill time. They were about connection with nature, with each other, and with ourselves. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to bring that back. Swimming and beach outings. Back in the day, a trip to the beach wasn't just about getting a good Instagram shot. It was an all-day event. Families packed picnic baskets, kids built sandcastles without watching YouTube tutorials, and the only refresh button was jumping into the water to cool off. Friends would actually talk to each other. No distractions, no, hold on, let me check this meme real quick. Instead of scrolling through feeds, people watched waves roll in, raced each other along the shore, or tried to impress their crush with an epic dive. That probably ended in a belly flop. And let's talk about swimming. This was the OG way to beat the heat. Public pools were packed and lakes turned into social hubs. Want to catch up on the latest gossip? You didn't text, you floated on an inflatable raft and talked. The best part? No one was documenting every second. If something funny happened, it lived on in stories, not in shaky, vertical videos. Of course, I'm not saying people don't still hit the beach today, but let's be honest, half the crowd is on their phones, enjoying the sunset through a camera lens. So next time you're at the beach, try this. Leave your phone behind, dive into the water, and just exist the way people did before screens took over. Trust me, you won't miss the notifications. Playing at arcades. Picture this. It's the 80s or 90s. You're walking into a dimly lit room, the air buzzing with the sounds of 8-bit music, clinking quarters, and the occasional Hadouken from the Street Fighter cabinet. Before smartphones took over our free time, arcades were the go-to spot for fun and competition and hanging out with friends. Back then, there was no scrolling through Instagram while waiting for a ride or binge-watching TikToks in bed. If you wanted entertainment, you had to go find it, and arcades delivered. These neon-lit wonderlands were packed with games that tested your reflexes, patience, and pocket change. Whether it was mastering Pac-Man's perfect routes, landing a high score in Galaga, or battling a friend in Mortal Kombat, arcades weren't just about playing, they were about beating someone, whether it was the game itself or the guy who just stole your spot at the cabinet. And let's not forget the social side of arcades. Unlike gaming today, where most multiplayer happens online, arcades forced you to actually be there. If you wanted to challenge someone in Tekken, You had to look them in the eye, slap that quarter down, and prove yourself in real time. Trash talk? Way more intense when you're standing inches from your rival. Of course, arcades started to fade when home consoles got better, and by the time smartphones took over, most people weren't dropping quarters into machines anymore. But for those who remember, arcades weren't just a way to kill time. They were an experience. A place where skill, community, and the occasional broken joystick told the story of a time before infinite entertainment was just a tap away. Going to the park. Yeah, I know, it sounds kind of basic, but back then, parks were the ultimate social hub. You weren't just there to get your steps in. You were there to exist in a way that made sense before technology hijacked our attention spans. Families would pack up for the afternoon, couples would take long walks, and kids? Oh, they weren't hunched over iPads. They were out running around, climbing on jungle gyms, and getting actual dirt under their fingernails. And let's talk about how unplugged people really were. If you made plans to meet at the park, there was no, hey, just text me when you get there. You just showed up, on time. And if your friend wasn't there yet, you either waited, made a new friend, or just walked around pretending to be deep in thought. Parks were also a place where boredom was kind of the point. People would sit on benches, feeding pigeons like they were in some indie film, or just stare at the sky for no reason. Today, that kind of stillness is rare because, let's be honest, when was the last time you just sat without checking your phone? So yeah, before smartphones, parks weren't just green spaces. They were the place to be. Simple, peaceful, and surprisingly entertaining if you knew how to enjoy them. Roller skating and ice skating. If you grew up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s before the time of endless TikTok scrolling and Instagram stories, or chats blowing up your phone, one of the most probable ways you could have spent your weekend was at the roller rink, or gliding across a frozen lake. Yeah, before we had screens glued to our faces, people actually moved for entertainment. Roller skating was a whole vibe. Picture disco lights flashing, funky beats pumping through the speakers, and people dressed in bell-bottoms and neon colors, effortlessly gliding across the floor. This wasn't just about getting from point A to B, it was about style, skill, and let's be honest, showing off a little. Skating rinks were the place to be. You'd meet your friends, maybe lock eyes with a crush during a couple's skate, and if you were lucky, you'd master the art of skating backward without wiping out. And in the winter, ice skating took over. No rink, no problem. People would find a frozen pond, lace up their skates, and spend hours racing each other or attempting figure eights. Ice skating was as much a social event as it was a sport. You'd see families, couples on dates, and kids daring each other to try tricks they had zero business attempting. Both roller and ice skating were more than just activities. They were entire eras of culture. Music, fashion, and friendships were all wrapped up in this movement-based fun. Today, with the rise of retro trends, skating is making a comeback, but let's be real. Back then, it wasn't just nostalgia. It was the way to spend a Saturday night. Keeping a planner or diary. Before smartphones hijacked our attention spans, before we scrolled endlessly through social media or set digital reminders, people had a different way of keeping track of life planners and diaries. Yeah, those little books filled with scribbles, stickers, and sometimes the deepest secrets of teenage angst. Planners weren't just for appointments, they were life organizers. People wrote down everything: grocery lists, birthdays, daily schedules, even random thoughts. Some took it to the next level, color-coding their tasks and adding little doodles to keep things fun. Sound familiar? That's basically the analog version of Google Calendar meets Notion. And then there were diaries. These weren't just for writing down what happened each day. Diaries were a personal escape where people vented frustrations, wrote about crushes, and documented world events in real time. Some even turned into historical goldmines. Think Anne Frank, Leonardo da Vinci, or Frida Kahlo. These legends kept journals that are still studied today. For many, flipping through pages of a planner was a daily ritual. Unlike smartphones, planners didn't send distracting notifications. No social media rabbit holes, just pure intentional planning. Today, we have apps that do everything planners and diaries once did. But let's be real. There's something satisfying about physically crossing off a to-do list or writing thoughts in an actual notebook. Maybe, just maybe, the old school way wasn't so bad after all. Reading professional books and journals. Before the infinite distractions of social media, people, especially professionals, spent a lot of time reading to stay ahead in their fields. Whether it was medicine, law, engineering, or business, Books and journals were the ultimate way to stay informed. Imagine a doctor in the 1980s sitting down after work, flipping through the New England Journal of Medicine, absorbing new research, or an ambitious business exec diving into Harvard Business Review instead of mindlessly refreshing LinkedIn. These weren't just casual reads, they were lifelines to staying competitive. But it wasn't just about professional growth. Reading these books and journals was a way to pass time productively. Long train ride? Crack open a journal. Waiting for a meeting? Skim through the latest case studies. Instead of checking notifications, people checked footnotes. Even students and young professionals took part. Libraries and bookstores were the go-to places, and subscriptions to industry magazines were considered a must. If you wanted to keep up, you had to put in the effort. No push notifications, just pure discipline. Fast forward to today, and most of this content is still available, but are we really reading it, or are we too distracted? Instead of swiping through Instagram, what if we spent just 15 minutes a day reading something that actually helped us grow? So maybe it's time to take a page from the past, literally. Dust off that industry journal or professional book. Because sometimes the best way forward is looking back. Attending seminars and workshops. One huge thing they did back in the day in their free time was attend seminars and workshops. Yeah, I know, sounds kind of old school, but hear me out. Back in the day, whether it was the 80s, 90s, or even early 2000s, if you wanted to learn something new or just meet like-minded people, you actually had to physically go somewhere. There were no YouTube tutorials, no TikTok life hacks, just real-life experts giving live talks on everything from business strategies to finding your inner self. These weren't just boring corporate events. We're talking about all kinds of workshops, writing retreats, photography classes, DIY home improvement lessons, even quirky stuff like how to read body language or mastering the art of public speaking. If you wanted self-improvement, you had to sit in a room full of strangers and actually listen. But here's the kicker. People enjoyed this. It was an experience. You got free coffee, sometimes even snacks, and best of all, you met real human people. Networking wasn't just a LinkedIn request. It was shaking hands, exchanging business cards, and maybe even making lifelong friends. Today, most of this has moved online. Instead of seminars, we have webinars. Instead of live Q&As, we have comment sections. And instead of physically showing up, we just click a link. Convenient? Absolutely. But do we miss out on that human connection? Maybe. So next time you're doom scrolling, think about it. What if, just for a day, you went old school and actually attended a workshop? Could be kind of fun, right? Networking in person. All right, picture this. It's 1995. You're sitting in a coffee shop, no phone in sight, and instead of doom scrolling or pretending to text someone to avoid awkwardness, you're actually talking to people. Wild, right? But back in the day, networking wasn't just a buzzword for LinkedIn profiles. It was how people genuinely passed the time. Before smartphones turned us into screen-glued zombies, striking up a conversation with a stranger was the norm. Whether you were waiting in line, grabbing a drink at a bar, or stuck at the airport, small talk was survival. And it wasn't just pointless chatter. These in-person interactions often led to real opportunities. Job offers, business deals, friendships, even relationships. And it all started with a simple, hey, how's it going? Networking used to be a skill, almost an art form. People carried business cards instead of QR codes. They memorized phone numbers instead of relying on a contacts app. And if you wanted to meet like-minded professionals, you actually had to go to events. No swiping, no algorithmic recommendations, just pure human interaction. Conferences, trade shows, even happy hours were hotspots for making connections. And because you couldn't Google someone in real time, you had to actually listen and engage. Imagine that. People mastered the art of eye contact, firm handshakes, and reading body language, all skills that seem like lost relics in the digital age. Of course, smartphones made networking more efficient, but they also made it way more transactional. Back then, it was about the vibe, the energy of a conversation. Today, it's all about followers and DM slides. So maybe next time you're waiting around with nothing to do, put the phone away. Who knows? You might just network the old-fashioned way by talking to an actual human being. Video game consoles. Before smartphones took over every second of our free time, video game consoles were the ultimate way to escape boredom. Whether it was grinding through levels in Super Mario 64, battling friends in Halo 2, or getting lost in The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time consoles were more than just entertainment. They were the experience. Back then, gaming wasn't something you did in quick 5-minute bursts. It required dedication. You didn't just hop on for a match during lunch. You planned your weekend around marathon sessions of Final Fantasy or late-night Call of Duty showdowns with friends. There was no such thing as casual gaming, like we see with mobile games today. Instead, you had full-blown, immersive experiences that made you forget what time it was. Multiplayer? Oh, it existed, but not in the way we know it now. If you wanted to play with friends, they had to be sitting right next to you, controllers in hand, yelling at the screen in frustration or victory. There were no lobbies full of strangers, no Wi-Fi required matches, just you, your friends, and the console. These machines weren't just a way to kill time, they were the main way we spent time. Before we had infinite distractions in our pockets, consoles ruled as the kings of entertainment, and honestly, we kind of miss those days. Tabletop role-playing games. All right, picture this. It's the late 80s or 90s. Smartphones haven't been invented, no TikTok, no endless doom scrolling. You're hanging out with friends, a pile of oddly shaped dice in front of you, character sheets scribbled with stats, and one friend, the Dungeon Master, crafting a world where anything can happen. Welcome to the golden age of tabletop role-playing games, TTRPGs, the ultimate way to pass the time, before everyone had a screen glued to their face. TTRPGs like Dungeons & Dragons, Shadowrun, and Call of Cthulhu were the ultimate escape. No Wi-Fi? No problem. You had imagination, a group of friends, and a rulebook that somehow made pretending to be a wizard a structured activity. These games were all about storytelling, teamwork, and occasionally rolling a critical fail that turned a heroic moment into absolute chaos. But here's the thing. TTRPGs weren't just for nerds in dimly lit basements, though let's be honest, basements were involved. They were a social glue, bringing people together for epic adventures that could last months. It was a mix of creativity, strategy, and sheer unpredictability that kept people hooked. And let's not forget the cultural impact. Before open-world video games or binge-worthy fantasy series, TTRPGs were where you got your fix of adventure and lore. They built entire communities, inspired future game designers, and even led to today's biggest franchises like Critical Role and Stranger Things. So yeah, before smartphones, people weren't just bored out of their minds. They were slaying dragons, solving cosmic mysteries, and forging friendships that lasted longer than any Wi-Fi connection. And if you've never tried a TTRPG, maybe it's time to put down your phone and roll some dice. Going to religious services. Picture this. It's a Sunday morning, and instead of doom scrolling through TikTok in bed, you're waking up, putting on your nicest, or at least cleanest clothes, and heading out the door to church, the mosque, the synagogue, or whatever house of worship your community gathers in. Yeah, believe it or not, before smartphones turned us all into 24/7 content-consuming machines, a huge part of people's weekly routine, sometimes even daily, was attending religious services. Now, sure, religion has always been about faith, spirituality, and community, but let's be real. Before smartphones, it was also a major event in people's social calendars. This was where you caught up on local gossip, met new people, and let's face it, sometimes just sat through a long sermon because, well, what else was there to do? There were no endless YouTube rabbit holes or Netflix binges waiting for you at home. For a lot of folks, this was the weekend's main attraction. And we're not just talking about Sundays either. Many religious communities had midweek services, prayer meetings, or youth groups that kept people engaged. These gatherings weren't just about worship, they were about socializing, networking, even dating. Think of it as the pre-internet version of social media, except instead of DMs, you had awkward post-service conversations by the coffee table. For younger people, religious events often doubled as a chance to escape the boredom of home life. Parents loved them because it meant their kids were engaged in something wholesome, and teens went along because, well, where else were they going to meet people? Fast forward to today, and while religious services are still a thing, they're competing with screens for attention. But back then, if you wanted community entertainment, or even just a reason to leave the house, church was the place to be. Attending concerts and live theater. Back in the 1970s, before the emergence of smartphones and social media, one of the biggest pastimes was attending concerts and live theater. And let me tell you, it was a whole different vibe. Before we had TikTok dances and viral challenges, if you wanted to experience music or a gripping story, you had to be physically present. No YouTube clips, no live streams, just you, the stage, and the magic unfolding in real time. Imagine you're in the crowd for a Led Zeppelin show in the 70s, or maybe you're front row at a Prince concert in the 80s. People weren't standing there, filming on their phones. They were fully locked in, feeling the energy, singing every word, living in the moment. Concerts weren't just events. They were communal experiences. People dressed up, got together with friends, and made a whole night out of it. And let's be real, without distractions, the atmosphere was way more electric. Before streaming services, people went to the theater for their dose of drama, comedy, and storytelling. Whether it was Shakespeare at the Globe or a Broadway production in New York, live performances were a major way to experience art and culture. Instead of binge-watching a series, people followed plays and musicals, seeing them multiple times or discussing them with friends afterward. And if you missed a show, tough luck. No replays, no rewinds, you had to catch it live. These events weren't just about the performances. They were about connection. People met up before the show, talked about it afterward, and shared real, face-to-face experiences. No notifications pulling them away, just pure, uninterrupted fun. So yeah, before smartphones, people still found ways to be entertained, arguably in a more immersive and memorable way. Maybe it's time we put our phones down and bring some of that magic back? Just a thought. Visiting museums and historical sites. Finally, we have visiting museums and historical sites. Before the digital age, people engaged in more immersive and tangible activities to entertain themselves and learn about the world. One of the most popular ways to spend leisure time was visiting museums and historical sites. These visits were not only a source of entertainment, but also a means of education, cultural enrichment, and social engagement. Museums offered a window into history, science, and art, allowing visitors to appreciate artifacts, paintings, sculptures, and interactive exhibits. Many people would spend entire afternoons exploring natural history museums, admiring dinosaur skeletons, or studying ancient artifacts from past civilizations. Art museums provided inspiration, while science and technology museums fascinated visitors with hands-on experiments and innovations. These outings were often planned family activities, school field trips, or solo explorations, fostering curiosity and critical thinking. Historical sites, including castles, battlefields, and ancient ruins, also attracted large crowds. Walking through historic locations gave visitors a sense of connection to the past, helping them visualize events that shaped their world. People would read plaques, listen to tour guides, and take photographs with film cameras to document their experiences. These excursions encouraged storytelling as families would pass down tales of past visits and historical lessons learned. Unlike today, where entertainment is often consumed through screens, visiting these places required physical presence, patience, and active participation. Without smartphones to provide instant information, people relied on guidebooks, museum pamphlets, or in-person experts to enhance their understanding. The experience was social, as visitors engaged in discussions, asked questions, and reflected on what they saw. Though smartphones have changed how people interact with history and culture, museums and historical sites remain valuable spaces for learning and discovery. However, the way people experience them today, often through digital guides and social media, has evolved significantly from the pre-smartphone era. Conclusion. So there you have it. Before smartphones took over our lives, people actually had to get creative with their time. Whether it was chatting with strangers on a train, getting lost in a book, or absolutely dominating in a board game. Entertainment was a little more hands-on. People weren't constantly scrolling. They were present, engaged, and dare I say, maybe even a little less stressed. Now, does that mean we should all throw our phones into the ocean and go full 1980s? Not necessarily. But maybe it's a reminder that we don't have to fill every spare second with mindless scrolling. Maybe next time you're in line at a coffee shop, instead of refreshing your feed for the 10th time, you try people watching or sparking up a conversation. Who knows? You might just pass the time in a way that actually sticks with you, if you like.